Over the past 5 or so years, industry figures, game analysts, and YouTubers have all predicted the end of console gaming and that the next generation of consoles will be the last console generation and will mark the beginning of the end of console gaming as we know it. Well, what if they're right? What if we really are starting to see the beginning of the end of console gaming? Now, hear me out, because the argument I'm making is not the common argument that you usually hear. The argument that console gaming's death will be at the hands of streaming services like PlayStation Now. I've made videos specifically on this topic alone, but in short, streaming services, while they will gain more prominence over the next few years, are not in any position to replace consoles or PCs in the near or distant future. High-speed internet isn't even close to being accessible enough for such a service to have mainstream success, and even if it did, how many of y'all are really going to drop your consoles and expensive gaming rigs and just play your games on a streaming service where you have no ownership over the game? If a show or movie leaves Netflix, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. Most people who watch movies do not even watch it more than once, but when you play a video game, you play it multiple times. So what happens if that game leaves the streaming service? All your progress is lost, your ownership of that game is completely lost, and it's just not a good value for gamers. That business model does not work for the gaming industry. It just will not work. I just want to get that out of the way. Now let's get into the meat of this video. I think the death of console gaming, while still very unlikely to ever happen, is possible. But the death of console gaming would not be at the hands of streaming services. No, instead I believe that if it were to happen, it would be Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo's own doing. Each company seems to be going down a completely different path. Let's start with Nintendo, who's been on record multiple times saying they have no interest in directly competing with Sony or Microsoft. They're essentially doing their own thing. And a lot of their actions seem to indicate that. Look at the Switch, released right between the 8th and 9th console generations. And hardware-wise, much weaker than the PS4, never mind the PS5. That alone shows you that they don't wish to compete if their hardware is so far behind their quote-unquote competition. And not to mention, they also haven't made any significant investment in their online infrastructure. We live in the digital age now where you have to have good online infrastructure in order to be a viable gaming platform. But Nintendo doesn't seem to care about that. They have their online subscription service that nobody wants. They have paid online, but the online is not good. You have to download a phone app in order to be able to talk online with your friends. Nintendo, their online infrastructure is just so archaic. It is so far behind the competition, and they seem to have demonstrated that they have no interest in improving their online infrastructure significantly. They seem to be stuck in their ways, and that's fine. It shows you, though, that they have no interest in really directly competing with Sony and Microsoft in the console race. They're just doing their own thing, especially since the Nintendo Switch, they're not even releasing their consoles now along with the other consoles. They're releasing it in between. It just shows you they're just interested in doing their own thing, which is fine, but that automatically knocks off Nintendo from actually competing with Sony. Because even if they reprioritize and decide, yeah, we do want to compete with Sony, it's going to be really hard for them because the Nintendo Switch is very underpowered. It will not be able to get significant third-party support very shortly, especially when the PS5 comes out. It already is struggling with third-party support. 2 years in, the Switch is doing so well, but I predict that once the PS5 comes out, the PlayStation 5 is going to completely obliterate the Switch. The Switch cannot hold up to the PS5 on a technical level because graphically it's no comparison, and also in terms of people caring about it. People are going to care a lot less about the Switch once that PS5 comes out because it's new, and that's what the Switch had. It's the newest console, and it had new games, hot games, but I guarantee once the PlayStation 5 comes out, the Switch will be completely irrelevant. So Nintendo's completely out of the picture. And now let's switch our focus to Microsoft. We all know what Microsoft is doing with trying to focus more on their services than the actual hardware, the Xbox hardware. They're focused more on Xbox Live being an online service that anybody, regardless of what they play on, can utilize it somehow. And of course, as you know, this includes putting their quote-unquote exclusives on other platforms, mainly the PC. I think that's what Microsoft's main focus is, more than the Nintendo Switch and all these other platforms people are talking about, mobile phones. I believe that Microsoft's objective, they have two objectives with what they're doing here in their future in the gaming industry. One, they really want to capitalize on that PC gaming market. They failed to do it in the past with Games for Windows Live, but now they feel like they have the opportunity now to really capitalize on PC gaming, because it bothers Microsoft to hell that they created Windows, and as you know, PC gaming pretty much relies on Windows. They don't really use Linux. Not too many PC gamers are on Mac. They're on Windows. But despite this fact, Microsoft doesn't make much money off of PC gaming, because PC gaming is an open-end ecosystem where developers, publishers can put games wherever they want. They don't necessarily have to pay Microsoft a dime, because they're not forced to do business with Microsoft. Companies like Valve, therefore, are ones reaping most of the rewards off of PC gaming. And that bothers Microsoft to hell, because they created Windows. They have all of these services and products that are on Windows, like Microsoft Office, for example. But they also have their own proprietary web browsers like Edge, but people would rather use Chrome. And that bothers Microsoft alone. But now, you have billions upon billions of dollars being generated in PC gaming. And Microsoft is making very little of that money, even though the whole ecosystem relies on Microsoft. Yet Microsoft is getting very little of the action here. So their first objective is to expand their PC gaming revenue, because they feel like they earned a lot of that money, and they're trying desperately to expand into PC gaming because they feel like PC gaming is their creation, and they're not getting much money off of that, which is not making them very happy. So what they're doing is that they're releasing these exclusives on the PC in order to get more money off of PC, because they are releasing these games on the Windows Store, and they're using Xbox Live. For example, if you buy Minecraft, State of Decay, all these Xbox exclusives, Crackdown 3, you are using Xbox Live, and therefore you are using Microsoft's service. Which brings me into their second objective as to why they are releasing these games on PC. It's a lot less about PC gaming and a lot more about Microsoft wanting to expand their services across multiple platforms. Look at what Microsoft has been trying to do the past 5 to 10 years. They've been trying to merge all of their products, all of their platforms into one singular platform. They tried to do that with Windows Phone. Didn't work so well, but Windows Phone was essentially a miniature PC. It was able to run the Windows operating system. It was a slight variant off of it, but it ran very similar to the desktop version, except it was optimized for mobile devices better. But if you put your mobile phone, your Windows Phone, into like some kind of adapter and plugged it into a monitor, you could actually use it as a desktop PC. So Microsoft's goal is to expand all of their services and products, such as Windows, into so many different platforms, like the Xbox, for example. You got Microsoft Edge on the Xbox. You think that's a coincidence? It's not. They are trying to make all of their services and products available on multiple different platforms, especially their own, like the Xbox and Windows Phone, which doesn't exist anymore, but you know what I'm saying here. They're trying to expand their services. It's all about their services now, and that's pretty much what the economy is transforming to. Apple's doing it too. Google is focusing on their services. All these big tech companies are focusing on services more than anything else, and Microsoft is a service brand first and foremost. They've been that way for years. More people know about Microsoft's products and services like Windows than they do about their hardware products like the Xbox and the Surface tablet, for example. Will this prove to be a beneficial move for Microsoft, moving their exclusives on multiple platforms and pretty much self-cannibalizing their console market? I don't know, but it definitely will hurt the Xbox hardware. And whether or not Microsoft cares about that, they probably don't care about that. But what's going to happen now is this is going to leave a huge power vacuum in the console gaming market, because Microsoft was the big competitor to Sony. Again, Nintendo's been doing their own thing. So Microsoft has really been Sony's reliable competition, and competition in any market is good. What I fear is going to happen without Microsoft focusing most of their effort on their console hardware business and trying to expand to other platforms and focus their efforts on other things, which may be a good or bad thing for Microsoft, we don't know yet. But no matter whether or not that's a good thing for Microsoft, is that a good thing for the console gaming market? I think this is bad for console gaming, because let me tell you what's going to happen here. Sony is going to have much less reliable competition, and that is one thing that we do not need here, okay? Sony already dominates the console gaming market. And I fear that with Microsoft giving you less of a reason to buy an Xbox with putting their exclusives on the PC, less people are going to buy Xboxes than they even did last generation. So I think the Xbox One is actually going to end up selling more units, more physical units, than the next Xbox, whatever that may be called. Maybe a bold prediction, but I know a lot of people are saying Microsoft is doing a lot of right. They may have learned their lessons, but again, they are focusing too much on different things. They're dipping their toes in too many other things to really focus primarily on their console gaming market. And especially, let me re-emphasize this point, with Microsoft no longer having exclusive games and putting their games on other platforms like the PC, it's really going to give people less of a reason to want to buy an Xbox in the first place. And if people have less of a reason to buy an Xbox than they did last generation, then the PlayStation's going to dominate even more than they did last generation, or this generation, whatever the hell you want to call it, the 8th generation. And have you guys looked at the numbers? This generation, Xbox One only sold 40 million units, and the PlayStation 4 over doubled that. They're on point to reach 100 million units sold. So imagine if that gap is even wider. Sony has even more free reign to do whatever the hell they want, because Microsoft's going to care less about the PlayStation selling more units and having a greater install base, because they view PC gamers and other people now as their customers. So they're going to view it as like, well, we don't care because we're making a lot of money anyway, and we don't really care about our actual hardware selling. We care about people using our services, which is fine, but what's going to end up happening then is Sony's going to have more control over console gaming, because Nintendo is their own thing, and Microsoft's going to care a lot less about it. Because make no mistake, Sony already won the 9th generation. There's no chance in hell that a Microsoft or even a Nintendo console is going to sell more units than the PlayStation 5. And with no real competition now, they're going to be able to do whatever the hell they want, more than they already have. They're going to feel more empowered to have more anti-consumer practices, because there's no competition in the market, really. You think everyone's going to switch over to PC? No, that's not going to happen. And then when it comes to these streaming services, they're competing with the streaming services already with PlayStation Now. And if you're not convinced that Microsoft needs true exclusives in order to compete, okay, look at the Xbox One compared to the PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 3 in 2006 was doing terrible. The first 2 years of its life cycle was a living nightmare. And that had a lot to do, mostly to do with the fact, besides it was overpriced, yeah, obviously, but the Xbox 360, all the AAA games, all the exclusive games were really on the Xbox. The PlayStation 3 didn't really have any games worth getting. But then what did Sony do? How did they turn it around and eventually tie the Xbox 360 after so many years of the Xbox 360 just completely dominating the PlayStation 3? Well, they came out with countless exclusive games to make people care. Games like Uncharted, Infamous, Killzone, Little Big Planet, Metal Gear Solid 4, Ratchet & Clank, and one of my favorites, which I think is very underrated, Mod Nation Racers. The point I'm trying to make here is, if you don't think exclusives mattered, then how is the PlayStation 3 able to almost match the Xbox 360 in sales after struggling for so long, while the Xbox One can't even come close to reaching half the sales of the PlayStation 4? Even though Microsoft quickly reversed those controversial DRM policies within a month of them even being announced in the first place, so I don't want that excuse. I also don't want the excuse that it was bundled with the Kinect. Well, the PlayStation 3 was even more expensive than the Xbox One was at $500, and they were still able to turn it around because they had those exclusive games. Xbox One has no games at all. They have no games, and this isn't me trying to throw shade at the Xbox, it's me just stating facts. And I'm also saying this because I am actually worried. I do not want Sony to have a monopoly. I do not want there to be no real competition in the console market, but based on what Microsoft is doing, they have no chance in hell against the PlayStation 5. Imagine the PlayStation what it would be right now without the Xbox. It would be pretty scary. The 7th gen would have been terrible because Sony would have kept doing what they were doing with the PS3, pretty much doing whatever the hell they felt like doing and not having any repercussions, but the Microsoft and the Xbox 360 forced Sony to step their game up with the PS3, and the PS3 remains one of the greatest video game consoles of all time because of that competition. Same with the PlayStation 4. The PlayStation 4 had all those consumer-friendly policies, most notably the ability to play used games without any online check-ins and all that other stuff that Microsoft was trying to do. But do you honestly think that the PlayStation 4 would have been so consumer-friendly if it weren't for Microsoft screwing up? I think if there was a third competitor that wasn't Sony and Microsoft, because again, Nintendo's out of the picture, you can't really count Nintendo because they're doing their own thing. But if a third guy was out there and was being a good competition to Sony. Like back in the day, you had Sony, Nintendo, and Sega all on the same footing. But now it's really Sony and Microsoft. And if Microsoft's kind of straying away from consoles, that's not a good thing for the gaming industry as a whole, in my opinion, because more people play their games on consoles than any other gaming platform, unless you want to count mobile phones, which means that Sony's influence on the gaming industry as a whole is going to grow even more than it already has. And they have a good chance of having a monopoly over the console gaming market, which people say exclusives are anti-consumer. How about monopolies? Those are really not pro-consumer at all, because in that case, you really have no choice. Yeah, sure, you could switch to PC if it gets that bad, but PC gaming's not for everyone, unfortunately, and a lot of people are going to feel left out. They're going to end up just tolerating whatever Sony throws at them, because there's going to be no options next generation. I think Sony's going to have a clear monopoly over console gaming, because the Xbox as a console is becoming more and more irrelevant as time goes on, and Nintendo's just doing their own thing, so who is left to stand in Sony's way? And I think we should really all be concerned about that.